let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to my talk about what I've learned for the last 5 years working on WordPress in higher education at a public university. My name is Jeremy Feltz. I'm a senior WordPress engineer at Washington State University. I've been there for 5 years. Actually, on my way out, I moved to half-time status last week, and I'm on my way towards full-time status at a web agency that I'm co-founding, Happy Prime. So pretty excited about that. I'm a member of the WordPress core team. I've been contributing to WordPress for 6-ish years or so right now. I created this popular local development environment, Varying Vagrants, which some people love and some people hate, but it's a nice tongue twister all the same. I blog about fish tacos on fishtacos.blog. It's a community site, so if you really enjoy fish tacos, you're welcome to join. I tweet more than I should, and I have a site that I think about writing on all the time. I really love free and open source software. It's kind of like what I want to work on for the rest of my life. I really love WordPress, and I really love thinking through and kind of working through the ways that open source software and WordPress are used in higher education, specifically for me in public institutions. 20 years ago, last month was the end of my first year at University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. So I had moved back to the western Chicago suburbs. I had sold all my textbooks and went skydiving. I got a job at the lawn and garden department in Sears Hardware, and started thinking a lot about that letter the university had sent me, telling me that your horrid GPA, which is like 1.2 or something, is not good enough to continue at University of Illinois, which makes sense. There's a couple reasons for that story, because the first one is that I obviously got the GPA because I didn't go to class, right? But I didn't skip class to drink or because of hangovers or anything like that. It was more so because I had too much fun being in the dorm. So if you walk down our hallway, it was always closed door, closed door, closed door, and then Jeremy and his roommate's door wide open. Everybody could come in, everybody could hang out, talk, play video games, do whatever. So there's something, whenever I think about why I like community so much, why I like open source so much, there's a piece of that goes back to kind of that later formative years where I really just enjoyed the idea of having people around, even though I definitely self-identify as an introvert. The second reason that I bring that story up is that 1 year of higher education is the only experience I had before I started at Washington State University. So I really had no idea what I was getting myself into. It was 5 years ago this weekend that I moved to Pullman to start, so it's kind of a fun anniversary for me. My friend and now business partner, who was my boss for 5 years, recruited me in WordCamp Seattle and at another WordPress event in Portland kind of a couple months before then. He had been hired as the new director of web communication for WSU, and it was a new role where leadership and even the president had said our web presence kind of sucks, and we really want to improve it. At the time, remember 5 years ago, like the mobile web was a big thing, and a lot of universities still weren't on board the kind of responsive designs and things. So they really wanted to start pushing forward there. And I pushed back a lot because at the time I was a remote employee living in Portland, and I loved both of those things. And he was trying to convince me that I needed to move to Eastern Washington, basically in the middle of nowhere, and become an office employee, something which I had decided I never wanted to do again. So we went back and forth and had a lot of great conversations. And then finally kind of that opportunity clicked. Because as he was explaining the university to me, he walked through how Washington State University is the public land grant institution. And it's that mission of land grant that really started connecting. Because every public university has kind of that mission of research and teaching. So we bring students in, we teach them, we do research, all of that. The land grant institution, which many of you are probably familiar with, has that extra service aspect as well. So in addition to the research, you kind of have this mission to pass that along to your local community. And that's become the kind of worldwide community as well. One of my favorite people to go back and read about is Kenyon Butterfield, who started the Cooperative Extension Service at land-grant institutions. He is an agricultural scientist in the early 1900s, a college administrator. So he said that universities, public universities, had a threefold function as an organ of research, an educator of students, and a distributor of information to those who cannot come to college. And that last part's like a super important piece of the land-grant system, I think. And something else he wrote, that the land-grant system, or the extension service in particular, provided the democratization of truth. And so when I think about that, and I think about WordPress, our tool of choice, with the mission of democratizing publishing, the math kind of does itself there, right? So I combine all of that with my other love at the time, which was the idea of narrating your work and sharing your work and everything you do, trying to do it in the open, so that as people went through their careers, they could always have a place in the future where you were now, and they'd have something to go off to help them move forward. So that was one of my assumptions when I first started at the university, is that I was going to walk in, talk to a bunch of researchers, kind of install WordPress for them, give them a blog, and say, now you can share your work as you do it, you can accomplish your service mission, and we're all good, right? I'd go home at night and I'd open up Feedly and I'd start just scrolling through blog posts that showed me all of the great research that WSU was doing. Unfortunately, that was not the case. Even though we're a land-grant institution, not everybody was ready to share. And it's not necessarily because they had a problem with it, it's because obviously everybody's schedules are already full with their teaching maybe 2 or 3 classes a semester, and then trying to find lab students and projects to fund the lab students, and then all of the existing service work with the communities. And the university itself is such a big organization that rather than there being this collaborative process, I think we have 12 colleges, 13 colleges, hundreds of departments, just a wide, system of things. It starts to foster more of an environment of silos rather than something that's collaborative. So everybody individually is sharing things, but that kind of communal sharing is hard to grasp. And then I realized quickly that in our own departments, we still weren't acting kind of as that public share of information. So I had to go all the way back to the beginning and start with us and have the work that we do be public as we do it. We did have one super success story. My friend Jake Leishman, who's one of the top hydrogen researchers in the nation, maybe the world, he bought into it right away. So he was site ID number 44 on our platform. He had never used WordPress in his life before, and just started blogging. So he's done, I think, most of a textbook. He writes about his son. His lab students share kind of their procedures in the lab. I know he's gotten funding through people who have found his site, which is a big selling point for why you should share your work. And then he's even had prospective lab students or grad students reach out to him because they found him through there. So over 4 years, he has 243 posts on there. And it's just been a lot of fun to watch kind of that natural share of work as it goes. I think this is one of the probably 2 or 3 most important things I think happened at the university while I was there, which makes me happy. Another assumption that I walked into is that the university is an enterprise. And the reality is that the university is an enterprise. There is definitely nothing changed about that. WSU itself has I think, $1 billion a year budget, thousands of employees, tens of thousands of students, all over the states, kind of worldwide presence. So there's definitely a lot going on in there. I think the part that I thought differently about was that this enterprise would be a little less political. That we had some kind of shared land-grant mission, and we were all on the same page, and we were gonna, move forward and move mountains and all that. But like Rachel said, I think a little while ago on a podcast, she likes to tell people that higher ed is enterprise on a budget, which is exactly right. There's, state budgets usually suck, or suck now a lot more than they used to. And it's getting harder to kind of accomplish these things. There's that kind of triangle of decisions for projects where you get cost or budget and timeline and features, and you have to choose 2. It's like with the university, you never get that cost one. You're always working with just the amount of time you have and then the features you can provide. And she also talks about how you have to get really creative in order to solve your enterprise solutions. And I think that's some of what starts to affect those politics, is because people are used to being creative to get what they need to get done. But then at the same time, they don't want to tell everybody how that happened, because they have this secret in through the provost because they know somebody over here and all of that. Where at the same time, the provost or the president could at any time stand up and say, we need this done right now, and everybody would drop it and go for it, which is a really interesting world to live in. Before I went to the university, I worked with 10up as a top WordPress agency. Before that, I was at a 24/7 call center for 12 years. So until I started the university, I was used to this pace that was just go, 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 go. Nothing shut off. 10up was definitely better than the 24/7 call center, which was a 12-year nightmare. But I still came into the university at that point used to this idea of billing hours, billing some sort of unit of time. Where in an agency world, it's you have a well-scoped out definition of what you're working on, and you're trying to accomplish it in a certain amount of time, and everybody's on the same page, and you're tracking everything that you're doing, and that's things are moving. I walked into the university, and on that first day, kind of felt super strange, because the week before, I had been tracking all my time in Harvest and wondering, when I woke up in the morning, when am I going to start billing my first hour? And then the next week, after moving to Pullman, I'm walking to coffee with all my coworkers and thinking in my head, the world's shutting down because we haven't, started doing something yet. Not that bad, but it took me a few months before I got used to the idea of not having a timer running that was telling me kind of what I should be working on. But that's the kind of the reality, because enterprise on a budget, you don't have a lot of money to work with. The idea of somebody hiring 4 developers all of a sudden to do, this big homepage refresh is kind of not there. It's hard to find those kind of resources. But the university does have time, or it should have time. So you should have kind of this longer period to get things done. Not all of the time. That's not always realized all the time, I think. It's because every marketing project is a big one, and every semester when students are coming in, it's a big one. And I guess every year before that, when you're trying to attract new students, there's all of these fast timelines. But at a public institution, it exists for the long game. You're there, this isn't meant to be defeatist, but you're there for a short amount of time in the grand scope of the university. So the thing that you can really hope for is that you kind of nudge it along a little bit, nudge it forward, nudge the progress, and hope it can continue without you. So before we get into kind of some more successes, failures, assumptions, I'm going to take a Bowie break. So as soon as I came up with this talk title, the 5 years of WordPress at Public University, the first track from Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars entered my head. 5 years, over and over again. And there's this lyric in there. My brain hurt like a warehouse that had no room to spare. I had to cram so many things to store everything in there. So Bowie's singing about, we've been told that the world's going to end in 5 years. The world's going crazy. The newscaster's crying on TV. And he's sitting there thinking, how am I going to spend these 5 years shoving all of the information in the world into my head so that I can remember it? So I started feeling like that when developing this talk, because at the same time, I'm trying to reflect on my 5 years of the university personally. I'm trying to write all of this documentation for everybody on my team that's going to keep things going. And then writing stuff for this talk to share with you all. So my brain's hurting like a warehouse for a different reason, and this is a nice therapeutic kind of way to disperse it. So here's more of what I've learned. One of our successes that we did almost right away is that we built a community around the web at WSU. So beforehand, there was this top-down kind of central marketing said your brand should look like this, and here's this one template you should use, and all that. In the process of improving the web at WSU, we also kind of started reaching out to more people and treating it more like a community, getting input on the things that we were building, on the things that people wanted to see. Michelle Tarby, back in 2014, she's the director of new media at Lemoyne. wrote a blog post about having open lab hours at your university as a way to support people, because we're often burdened through email, through phone calls throughout the week. Setting aside this time for people to come in and just ask whatever questions you want. And so I think it was 2 days after I read that article, we had our first open lab at WSU. And now for 4 years, every Friday, except for the, I think 2 or 3 Fridays that have actually fallen on holidays, we've had a 2-hour window where people can come in and ask questions and get support for everything. We're able to get feedback on new things that we're building and new sites that we've launched, and kind of try to just have an overall gauge on the health of the web at the university. And it's been an invaluable resource where if I were to go to another university and start working, I would try to do that right away. One of our failures is that it got super hard to ship actual features. For the first 2 years when I started working, I had this huge runway in front of me because I didn't have any prior responsibilities. I was the fresh developer at the university who was tasked with building this platform. So for the first year, I was heads down, kind of just, you know, we want to be able to do this and this and this and building. After we launched, we have 2 sites and then 20 sites and then 2,000 sites. The maintenance burden that surrounds the platform kind of grows. And then all of a sudden you're slogged down and kind of the day-to-day bug fixing and things. So it became a lot harder to ship features, especially because enterprise on a budget. It's a lot harder to hire new developers. It's a lot harder to convince people that you'd like a team of 10 or at least 2. So yeah, that was one thing that made the job tougher as it went along, and something I think we could have accounted for better by when doing kind of those large marketing projects for the president or for admission or whatever, taking more time to scope out features within those that we might be able to offer to the rest of the university without always having these deadlines that were immediately due. One of the successes, of course, is that we had a lot of sites. As I leave, we just crossed the 2,000 mark. So we have 60-something different networks and one single multi-site install. I think 10,000 users now, which is a good amount, I think, for 5 years. I think the rate of addition has been 1 a day for the last 4 years straight. So it's been fun just to see the constant increase. My one failure attached to that, it's just a semi-failure, is that I never got around to implementing open registration. So when I started in higher ed, I looked around at other universities and I saw VCUs, Rampages, Penn State's, like sites at Penn State, University of British Columbia has a blog system for their students. So these are multi-site installs that have tens of thousands of sites, just huge numbers of students and staff and faculty are in there just sharing their work, blogging, setting up their portfolios, all kinds of different uses. And it all goes back to that enterprise on a budget thing. From day one, I knew I wanted to do this, but then as we got more popular and that maintenance burden grew, it was hard in the back of your head to say, okay, now I'm going to pull the trigger and open this up for another 10,000 users. So yeah, I would love still to help a university implement open registration, hint, hint. But that one I'm going to have to set aside for now. A major success is that we were never hacked, unless it just happened. But yep. So I think WordPress has gotten a lot better over the years, especially over the last 5 years, at kind of the rate of security incidents, maybe, especially in WordPress core. The ecosystem around plugins, it's gotten a lot better, a lot easier for people to implement coding standards, kind of the knowledge around how to escape things, how to sanitize things, all of that has gotten a lot better. When I first started at the university, we knew that perception was going to be a big deal. So I reached out immediately to as many people as I could find to start talking about that. Our IT group had also just hired a kind of chief security officer. So I went down and had coffee with him and talked through kind of my approach to security. And I told him the only code that we're going to allow into our system is, you know, hopefully trusted code. I'm going to review every single line. We're not allowing every user to install their own plugins. So we tried to set the tone early with, you know, security is a concern for us, and it's not this thing we're just going to have be like the Wild West. And then at the same time too, we knew we were going to be the main WordPress presence on campus, but that any other rogue WordPress install around the university, if they had a security incident, the perception would reflect badly on us, and we would have a harder time gaining adoption because of how people felt. So that's worked out really well. I think the key is just that we haven't really installed any untrusted code, and it's been a pretty good experience. Another one of our successes is the WordPress Contributions. So it wasn't too long after I started that I became the multi-site maintainer for WordPress core. And it was, I think, as a direct result of the work that we were doing at Washington State. The needs that we were running into as we built this, kind of multi-network platform, I was able to immediately, like during the day, translate those over to tickets that we were able to fix. And that's been, I think, a major impact. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, and how the work at the university has been done. Because we were never behind the curve. We always knew what was coming, what was going to break, or what we needed to be ready for. And we've been able to move WordPress forward, at least at some level, in the last 5 years. Another success is that we open sourced a lot of stuff. From day one, I created a GitHub organization for WSU, and almost every single line of code I've written has been open source from the beginning as it happened, which accounts for a lot of code now. I think our organization has something like 300 repositories, which is a lot to filter through. It's not entirely useful for everybody. The failure that's part of that is we didn't really package it up for distribution, because there's a process of sharing your work when you share it to kind of narrate it as you go. And that's what I would consider a lot of this, is it's open source and that it's in the open. Somebody can come along, somebody can fork it, somebody can use it for what they're doing. The maintenance burden of trying to package that up and put it in the WordPress.org plugin repository and provide support for it kind of starts to grow. And I think in a perfect world, the public institution would also realize that and hire more and more people to do all of our jobs. But, that's where we are. We're going to move on to approaches. We're going to move on to politics. So there's a fun tidbit that I like to remember. Back when President Bush was leaving office, President Obama was coming in. On that kind of inauguration day, Obama said that the advice that Bush gave to him coming in, and I wouldn't be surprised if this was advice that other presidents have given each other through the past, is that you should pick a pardon policy and stick to it. That's the first thing that you should do, and make sure that you're consistent about it the entire time. So one of the first things I did at the university, it's a lot different from a pardon policy, but just pick a plugin policy and stick to it. Because if you don't start saying no right away to a bunch of people who would like features, then things are going to get out of hand. And I knew from experience, from watching talks, from talking to people at our universities, that things get out of hand super quickly. And all of a sudden you have hundreds of plugins installed, and you're trying to find a way back from that. And I didn't want to get to that point. I wanted to kind of always have a clean approach. So right away we got the emails like, okay, can we install this? Can we install this? Can we install this? And right away I wrote up a page that said, this is our plugin policy. This is an ideal WordPress plugin. It's what we're looking for. And we've tried to stick to it. So an ideal WordPress plugin should have an open source license that's compatible with the GPL, which technically by definition, any plugin that extends WordPress should have a GPL license. It's got an open development process. So this is one of the most important things. If something goes wrong with that plugin and I need to go in and fix a bug to prevent it from bringing down our entire system, in a perfect world, I have a way of submitting that bug fix upstream to that project so that I don't have to maintain this separate fork for the next however many years. If it doesn't have that, it becomes another maintenance burden. Because every plugin you install on your system, you become responsible for, because you are the first point of contact. You aren't going to wait for support forum answers on WordPress.org, and you have to take at least some responsibility. The other one is that it solves a specific need and does not contain a large amount of code. And if you ask me to define very specific and define large amount of code, I'll give you some vague answer. It's like I know it when I see it. But it really would be great if every plugin was a few hundred lines of code and it did one specific thing, and it was kind of like this on-off switch for what I wanted to happen. And then it passes a full code review by web communication, me. Or if I know other agencies have used this plugin in work, and if I know their process is to put it through a detailed code review before they implement it, then I'm more willing to take a chance. Every time that I've broken these rules because of pressure, I've regretted it in the future. There's always been a case where we install this one plugin and it doesn't have an open development process, and now we maintain a fork of that plugin, which is super annoying. Private plugins, premium private plugins that somebody pays for, and I give in and install it, and then all of a sudden there's this outline process that you have to deal with to keep it updated. And often that code is not as good as much of the open source code that's out there. I've promised to myself that I would never say bad things about plugins in public again, because plugins really are a great way to share your work, to scratch an itch, to get it out there. Not every plugin is an enterprise plugin. And when you're running multi-sites for thousands of sites, you need enterprise plugins. The one plugin that does break all of my rules is Gravity Forms, which is absolutely one of the most useful plugins that a university can have, I think, just because of what you can do with it. But it doesn't have an open development process. It is open source code, which is good. And it's very large. And the code quality has gotten significantly better over the last 5 years, which is absolutely appreciated. But so there are some specific cases where when it makes sense, I'll break the rule because I guess it'll save thousands of engineering hours in the process. Another approach that I've started to learn is to beware the boilerplate, specifically your boilerplates. So one of the things we did early on is we knew we were doing the same thing to create child themes all the time and the same thing to create plugins all the time. So we created these boilerplate projects, and now we can save a couple hours by just cloning it, going, and then shipping things quickly. The problem with the boilerplate, especially at a university where you have a staff of 1 or 2 web developers, is you start relying on that same technology over and over and over again. And 1 year becomes 3 years, becomes 5 years, and all of a sudden you're looking around at the rest of the world, and they've moved on from tool A to tool Z, while you're still trying. You've stopped progressing. And I think looking around the university, sometimes that can become kind of the way it happens. Is it's harder to progress because you're not starting with something new every time. Which doesn't mean that the right answer is also to start with something new every time, but there's something in the middle where finding ways to increase your skill set while building new projects is super important. And actually probably looking at other people's boilerplates, like Joe in the Gutenberg workshop yesterday showed the create block scripts that creates Gutenberg blocks for you. So going out and finding those new boilerplates that others are writing, absolutely helpful towards learning something. Reusing your own over and over again, maybe less helpful. There's another problem that I probably personally had for a while, and that's really sitting down and identifying the problem before solving it. One of the first things that we did when I came was we decided that the university had restricted everybody in the sites they could make for so long that we really wanted this experience where you could make whatever site you wanted. And in 2013, page builders were just picking up steam. So we said, hey, we're going to solve that problem by implementing a page builder. And Theme Foundry had a great theme make. I knew the developer, Zach Tolman. I knew how the data was structured, and I said, okay, I can live with this because it's still HTML in the post content. And so we forked that and made it into our kind of parent theme for the entire university. And thinking was like, everybody will be able to design their own pages with all these columns and headlines and images, and we'll create this modern web and it'll be great. The reality is that not everybody is a designer of web pages. So you end up with these kind of complicated things that have too much involved, much more than they need to, when the real mission should just be communicating that that message that you're trying to get across. So the problem with this approach is that we enabled that page builder by default. So for the last several years, everybody's experience has been create a new page, the page builder interface comes up. In hindsight, what I would have done is sat down with people, figured out what they really wanted from content editing, find out what they really, really wanted from content editing, and then probably set it to be an option rather than the default. Because if you look around the university now, we provided a super complex way for people to write stuff that still would just be fine as headlines and paragraphs. One thing that I would absolutely recommend is that you contribute to WordPress. And finding times, I was lucky enough because when I was hired at WCU, we actually wrote this into my job description that I was gonna play conduit between Washington State University and the community, that it was important. I think a lot of people choose, especially up at the higher levels, choose WordPress because it's free, not because it's WordPress. And I think it's super important. I think Washington State actually chose WordPress because it's WordPress, which I think is an important distinction. Because communicating or contributing back to the community is helpful for you because of the knowledge that you gain. It's helpful for the community because of the knowledge they get from you. And if you talk, so there's the approach where you kind of go along and then you're a little bit surprised every time there's a WordPress update. And then you cross your fingers and you hit update and you hope everything works out and that nothing broke. The alternative to that is spending a few hours a week participating in the dev chats on the WordPress Slack, reading the Make WordPress blog. And those two things alone is probably 2 hours a week. And you'll know immediately what the schedule of WordPress is, what new features are coming, what bugs are being fixed. A couple more hours a week, and then you can really get into following some of the real stuff, the big bugs, big possible breaking changes that people are trying to avoid. You can really help test that newer version in your environment to help bring up issues before they happen. So when the Gutenpocalypse happens, you're ready for it. You aren't surprised that everything's working or installing the classic editor plugin because of the fear that kind of comes with not being involved. And if you're at a public institution, especially a public university, this isn't under everybody's control, but I really think public institutions have a duty to contribute back to open source. It's such an important thing that the entire open source infrastructure itself is under contributed to, underfunded. And places that have billion-dollar budgets should be able to do a better job. Opinions. So we're gonna wrap up with a few specific tools, plugins that I love. So these all technically should have passed the plugin policy muster, we'll see. Some of them are obvious, some of them are a little less. If you haven't heard of Query Monitor, John Blackburn, who works for HumanMade, this is one of the best developer plugins out there. It runs in your admin bar. It shows you kind of some statistics about how many queries ran on the page. You open it up and there's this beautiful inspector at the bottom of the screen that tells you what actions ran, what plugins called what, and kind of how much time it took. It's been absolutely invaluable, and John writes really excellent code. Another one of his plugins is user switching. So if you're managing a large multi-site install and you're getting bug reports from different people, you can go to their site, go to the users table, and then hit switch user, and all of a sudden you see WordPress as they see it, which is also great for trying to reproduce something that you may not see as a super admin. 10up has a plugin, restricted site access. That's one of the first things we installed. So this lets us have public sites and sites that search engines don't look at, and then this other level of restricted sites where you either have to be logged in or match a IP range or something. And this works great. It's like as a network activated plugin, as a site activated plugin. So super helpful for staging sites and sharing them amongst the community before pushing them live. Another 10up plugin, Safe Redirect Manager. So this provides a post type where you can put in redirects, and it's a super easy interface, especially for creating like short URLs on the fly, or if you've moved a site into WordPress and you don't want to deal with creating all the redirects on the server, people can manage this themselves pretty well. WP document revisions probably exceeds the rule of a very small plugin that does one specific thing, but it's also pretty invaluable. It provides a post type that kind of masks uploaded files, so you can keep them as private and share the links, and you can manage revisions where if you need to change a PDF every month or something, it can retain the same URL. That's been super great to us. We've contributed a lot back to the project while doing this, so I think that a lot of the bugs have been ironed out, and it's a lot of fun to use. Our users absolutely love it, which is nice, and has allowed me to avoid having to implement something like enable media replace, which seemed like a lot more work than I wanted it to be. Human Made has a Cavalcade, which is hands down, I think, the only way I would run cron on multi-site ever again. It's a PHP job runner that just runs in the background on the server. You disable the default cron, and then jobs run as predicted. It's not this weird system where they run if the site's been visited under a certain, in the right amount of time. Yeah, it's been great. Another human-made plugin, S3 Uploads, has become our tool of choice for getting stuff to S3. We have a great relationship with our IT department. They gave us this really large VM with like 120 gigs hard drive space. But if you watch the size of uploads as your network grows, it doesn't ever go back down. So the cost of hard drive size with our IT department versus the cost of like this dynamic storage with S3 was kind of a no-brainer. And S3 Uploads has made that super easy. Customized snapshots. So if you enjoy the customizer, which I hope everybody does by now, in 4.7, the idea of snapshots was inserted into WordPress, but there was no UI for it. This actually gives you a UI. So if you use the customizer, change a bunch of things on the page, you can save a draft, you can share it with other people, you can even schedule the changes so that they happen in the future, which is a lot of fun for creating like a featured news experience. But then this gives you a UI on the back end where you can filter through all of those snapshots and see what's going to be changing, which provides a pretty good way to debug what's happening if you have issues, and then a pretty good way for content editors to go in and kind of get an idea of how things are going to happen. So that's by XWP, Western Router, and is a lot of fun. And then my last favorite plugin is Public Post Preview by Dominic Schilling, another WordPress contributor. And that's exactly, actually, it's not exactly what it sounds like. It's more like draft post preview. But it allows you to preview a draft, send a link out to other people without having to do any extra work to keep it hidden from the public. In 5 years, that's all I've got. My slides are at jeremyfeld.com/WPCampus 2018. I heard that the feedback form does not work right now.
Yeah, the Q&A is not implemented, but
we probably have a few minutes to do some Q&A.
6 minutes.
Cool. Yeah.
How do you manage the updates on all those plugins?
How do we manage the updates on all the plugins? So we do all of our deployments through GitHub. So we have one collective repo that stores public plugins that we like. So I called it a public plugin collection, I think. So whenever there's an update, I'll go to WordPress.org, I'll download it, I'll sync it into that repo, and then push it up and deploy it. So a manual process is probably the good way to explain it.
That's manual when I had in my head.
Right. And that's the same thing with WordPress, and the same thing with any of our custom plugins is whenever we tag a release on GitHub, it shows up a few seconds later on the server.
So now you mentioned, the first two plugins you mentioned were Query Monitor and one of the other kind of debugging plugins. Do you only run those on like staging, or do you have those activated in production? In production. So the only thing that Query Monitor would do is add like a drop-in for the database, and so we avoid that, but everything else is, and we don't have it activated everywhere, and I believe we might even have it restricted, so only super admins can activate it, but yeah.
Were you part of the initial conversation at the university about why WordPress as opposed to some other product?
No, luckily I didn't have to fight that battle. That was, even before my boss got hired, they had already had success with WordPress at one of the colleges.
Okay.
The lead communicators there were moved into the central marketing group, and they said, we want to do WordPress and then move forward. So yeah, I skipped that whole step that a lot of people had to go through.
I'll borrow something out of
Yeah.
So you mentioned discovering that not everybody was ready to share.
Mhm.
How did you convince your administration that they should let you share back to the WordPress community?
I didn't.
You did it, right?
Well, that's, yeah. Break the rules, ask permission, like whatever. Yeah. So I think there was an expectation coming in that I was going to contribute to WordPress. I made that clear, at least.
You told that.
Right. Well, and I think they were completely on board with that. They're like, whatever you need, if you think that's the right way, this is good. I never asked anybody about sharing the rest of the code in public. I just said, well, I work on GitHub and I work at a public institution, so everything's open source, right? And then nobody ever said no. So, you know, and I'm pretty sure at some point I tracked down some language somewhere that implied that it should be open source. Because it, just like anything else, it's kind of a matter of public record. In some ways, you could probably do a Freedom of Information Act request anyway. So I made it easier, I guess.
Oh, I was going to piggyback off this question about not having to be there for the initial conversation about WordPress, but what about multi-site? Was that something that you guys had to come to?
Yeah. That was yeah. So multi-site versus single site, like I ran across a picture the other day of like a whiteboard from the first week that I worked there, and it was like all these questions I was thinking through. And it really was, because at the time I had used multi-site for I think one project or two projects. And it was a question, like, because this is a big decision at the beginning. Either you're going to find yourself 5 years later, you know, upset that you didn't use multi-site or upset that you did. But yeah, I went through the process of, should we do multi-tenancy? Are there other ways of doing it? And it all came down to, because we have a shared user set, and we wanted to maintain strict control over a shared plugin set, and we were going to have one parent theme, it was like, okay. And then it worked out pretty well. I think I'm happy with the decision. John?
Decisions from the last 5 years you are unhappy with?
What's that?
Any decisions you made in the last 5 years that you're unhappy about?
Unhappy about. Let's see. Well, the page builder, I still go back to that one is kind of a disappointment. I think I'm probably unhappy with myself that I got kind of mired in a lot of the maintenance and didn't take more of a stand to really get some more big things done. And there's probably, I mean, you get stuck in that wheel where every day you show up and all of a sudden several years went by. So I don't know if I'd call that a decision, but that's one of the things where it would have been fun to push a little bit harder, get a little bit more done. Oh, one specific thing, sorry. Just thought of it. When we started, I thought it was going to be this great idea to set up another VM, and we're going to call it Indie, which we did. It was going to be for whenever there was a project that didn't fit in multi-site, we were going to spin up a single WordPress install. And so in that first couple months, we set up like 3 of those sites. And then I stopped because it was the worst idea in the world, and I've regretted those 3 sites ever since. They aren't on multi-site. They're still on single site. Yep. And we moved one of them in, I think, but there's still 2 out there that are just like, no, now that I'm leaving, you know. But yeah.
All right, I think time for one more question.
One more?
So, yeah, you talked about running out of runway as maintenance added up, and as a result, you wanted to do like open registration. What else besides open registration that you didn't get to, that you really wanted to do, or that you see coming down the pike in WordPress or potential that is your segue now?
Right.
Wish you could be part of it.
Well, there's two directions there. That first thing about sharing your work, I wish I had made a lot more progress about that throughout the culture of the university. Not everybody's going to change immediately, so that's fine. The second one is that I'm a little bit disappointed that I'm going to miss out on the conversion to Gutenberg, because I see a lot of exciting possibilities, even in the way that our page builder HTML structure is formatted. I think it's going to be an interesting, but definitely not impossible technical challenge to move that into Gutenberg. And we've done a good job, I think, so far of getting everybody at the university excited about Gutenberg. So it's going to be interesting to see that kind of months after I leave all happen without me. So that would be more fun if we had, and I also probably missed up a little bit of an opportunity to implement beta versions of Gutenberg a little bit earlier in the process so I could get them on the right track before taking off.
All righty, thank you very much, Jeremy.